So last fall, Courageous Parents Network introduced a new tool, and you see the homepage there on the left-hand side of the screen, and you'll see that little arc, see the colored circles that look like an arc, and that little squiggly line, that represents the arc of a life, and then also that our lives don't follow like a smooth trajectory because we're all dealing with complications. But this particular digital tool, NeuroJourney, specifically addresses it for parents who are caring for children with severe neurological impairment. Now that's a very broad term, and it can range from really severe neurological conditions like my son's to some more milder ones. And unlike Courageous Parents Network, it also incorporates medical information. And I'm gonna go through a little bit more of this towards the end of my presentation, I hope. So you will get some insights into what medically might happen. We worked with physicians across the country to develop this tool. But both of these tools provide something called anticipatory guidance. And anticipatory guidance is really important part of feeling like being a confident decision maker. And we're going to talk about anticipatory guidance here today. So here's a staggering fact about decision making, okay? Who would have guessed that on average, the average person makes 35,000 decisions a day? Now, many of these are made mindlessly. They're things we don't even think about. You open your refrigerator and you pull out the orange juice. You've actually made a decision, but you're not consciously really thinking about that decision so much. But the research also illustrates that as the level of your responsibility increases, so does the multitude of choices or decisions that you need to make. So what do you think that means for families like ours? Well, it means we are tired. We are really tired. And we likely suffer from something called decisional fatigue. It's a real thing. I never heard of it before. And that's the mental exhaustion that comes from making so many decisions. Research reveals that these 5 things tend to increase decision fatigue. And I think most of you can probably put a check mark next to each one. Ready? Here's what they are. You make a lot of decisions every day. Your decisions impact other people. You're in the midst of a difficult life situation. You're faced with uncertainty. You have perfectionist tendencies, or you've developed them as a coping mechanism for the uncertainty that lies ahead in your life. And I want to tell you about this term because it wasn't something I was familiar with, and I think it's important to realize as you're going through making decisions for your child that you think about it as a real thing, that you validate it so that you feel less alone, more normal, it's real. There's another big contributing factor to decisional fatigue that I wanted to bring to your awareness today. And that is this family cycle. So Courageous Parents Network did our own little tiny research. And what we discovered is that there are 3 critical phases in the family journey. The first phase is orientation. Now you felt that at diagnosis, right? You needed to rectify what was new in your life, adjust to things. But there are other times when you need to orient to something new. It might be a new medical condition for your child. It could simply be something like a change of school, a divorce, a job change, any of those normal transitions that come along at certain periods of your life. Times of orientation are times when you may feel these feelings: confused, alone, desperate for information or guidance. Once you sort of orient, you've, let's say at diagnosis, you've sort of felt that sadness of dreaming about the life that you aren't going to have now. You start to navigate. You sort of pull up your bootstraps and you're like, okay, I'm going to go. And this is the period of time where you start to find your supports, the doctors that you might need, the school teachers that you might need, maybe it's a respite care worker, and you start to put them all in place. Maybe it's just a circle of friends that's supporting you. This is a time period that we find most families are facing interventional decision points. And by that, that's a big word. That's meaning, am I going to do this with my child's care or that? In my case, it was, am I going to give him a feeding tube or not give him a feeding tube? Am I going to fuse his spine or not fuse his spine? Those were some of the bigger decisions that we had to face. And this period is marked by having to make those decisions. So this is when fatigue really can set in. This is also the period where you feel a deep need to understand your options and the impact of your decisions. And I say that because we're going to talk a little bit about decisional regret in a minute, and the impact of your decisions is the part that you really are struggling to sort out, and it can be very fatiguing during this phase. Once you've kind of put all these things in place, and you kind of have all of your people and things that you need, you start to feel confident in the direction your family's going. And everybody experiences this at some point. Even if right now you are not, you will get a period. It may only last 2 days, it may last 2 years, but you're gonna get that time where you feel like you're confident in the decisions you've made, your family's moving forward, you feel healthy, your family is strong. It's when, I like to say, you feel as though you're being a good parent to your child. So how does understanding this cycle help you cope with decision making and help you cope with decision fatigue? Well, here's the thing about families who are caring for children with medical complexity. This cycle repeats again and again and again. And all families face orientation and navigating and moving forward, because all families have to make choices, but our families, we do it again and again and again, and it can go faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And here's the other critical piece of this cycle that's really important to consider when you're thinking about decision making, is that the cycle, not every member of the family is experiencing this cycle at the same time. Even as the thing that kicked it off might have been the one that put you there. So for example, in my own life, I was often still orienting, dealing with the feelings, sort of gathering my wherewithal to changes in my son's disease, and my husband had already moved on to navigating. He was already reaching out to the doctors, looking for the thing, putting everything in place, organizing the lists, and I was still back there going, hey, wait a minute. I'm still feeling too sad to cope with this decision at the moment. I still need a little more time. And what happens with that, it makes the decision-making process harder because you're trying to do it together. And there's a lot of research that says when decisions are shared, we actually have more confidence in them. That's why the medical profession always talks about something called shared decision-making. And so you have to think about how this is intentional in your own family, and it will help you become a more confident decision maker. So I wanted to just give you some signs of decision fatigue. I mostly wanted to put those up here on the screen so that you could say to yourself, well, geez, I'm feeling that. Is this really about decision fatigue? It's not about me having headaches all the time or feeling like I have brain fog, although brain fog is confusing now because we have COVID. You know, people don't think about procrastination or avoidance as a sign of necessarily decision fatigue, but it very much can be. So for example, if you find yourself avoiding being in a public situation, some of that is because we feel like others because we're living a different life. But question yourself and think, am I avoiding that because I don't want to be in a place where I have to make another decision? Are you impulsive in some of your decisions? Sometimes when we're making really hard, complex decisions, the mental energy of doing that can make us impulsive in other decisions. So for me, for example, I was going to TJ Maxx, man, all the time. And I was buying stuff that I did not need. And I really had to stop and think about it and say, oh, you know what? I had to make a really tough choice today for my son, or I'm tired of the choosing right now. I need to go to TJ Maxx and get that one thing that doesn't make me have to think about it. But I had to stop doing that because my husband didn't like the credit card bills. Irritability. You know, that sounds really stupid or plain or simple, and it's hard to recognize that irritability. I'll give you a good example. So here's the thing about decision making and when you are faced with a lot of them. How many of you have had somebody say, can I bring you dinner tonight? Yeah. Guess what they just did to you? Who's in the position to make the decision? You or the person offering? You are. They just put another decision back on you. It's a simple one. It feels like nothing big, but when you've been making a lot of them, it's just the thing. And it used to make me so crazy. And so I would offer this suggestion to those of you who are not the caregivers in the room and are caring for the caregivers is try this approach. I see you make a lot of decisions every day. I'd like to take one off your plate. Let me bring you dinner on Tuesday night. So what did I just do? I validated the experience of the person making a lot of decisions. I left the responsibility on me. I picked the night and the day. The caregiver can say, no, Thursday night would be better, but you didn't make me have the responsibility of that decision. And this is how the irritability would show up in me when people would say things like that to me, and I'd be like, oh, it's not really an offer. If you understood how many decisions I have to make, I can't make this one too, you know? Don't give me that. So look for the irritability and how it shows up in you. Overwhelm is a big one. We all experience it, and in fact at CPN we do a whole presentation on just overwhelm. But overwhelm is when your head screams, I just can't do it anymore. If that happens, it's likely that you're in an intense period of decision making. So think about it. And the last one we're going to explore a little deeper today, because I think it's the one that weighs the most on parents. And it weighs the most on every parent, and that's the important part to remember, that we're not singular, even as we have singular situations. So I wanted to talk a little bit about decisional regret and what it is. Maybe you have never heard of it before, and this is the first time you're coming across it. But decisional regret is when you say to yourself, I wish I had. It's a time when you imagine a different outcome that might have occurred because you had made a different choice. It is something, and this is the important part, it's something we can only experience. And where do we experience it? Here or here? Yeah. We can only experience it in retrospect after it has already happened. Okay? It often brings with it a sense of loss for what could have been, and in turn, this is the important part, it can bring on all of the other losses. So when you find yourself having decisional regret, it can make you mentally sort of go back and replay all of the other things, all of the other decisions. Okay? And so I bring awareness to that so that you can think about if that's what's happening to you. There's a lot of intentionality in what I'm going to say today, or it takes intentionality to think about it. The other thing I want to say about decisional regret is that it can be experienced immediately after the decision. So maybe you had a procedure for your child and the outcome wasn't what you wanted. Like once I had to give my son Botox to loosen his muscles, he ended up having a negative reaction to the Botox. I was very regretful of the decision. It happened immediately because his reaction happened pretty much right after the injection. But sometimes it can creep in a long time later. So for example, when my son was 5, there was a novel treatment that was very high risk for his disorder. And my husband and I evaluated it and we chose not to do it. But years later, when my son was really declining, because his was progressive in nature, you saw, I revisited that decision. Some other decision came about and I was like, oh. And for a moment, I thought about it, just for a moment. But, you know, it can bring back some of those things. And I also want to tell you that the reason why we try to support so much decision-making at Courageous Parents Network is there is also a lot of research that yields that when you have decisional regret, you are often more likely to have more complex or complicated grief. And so, of course, that's something we want parents to avoid, right? Especially if you're a parent like me, where you know I knew that my child was not going to live beyond his teenage years. Sadly, I want to tell you about something else that goes along hand in hand with decisional regret, and that's anticipated regret. And this plays a really big into decision making. This is understanding that when difficult decisions are going to come, the stakes feel very high, and so you start to develop a paralyzing fear over making a decision. Now, that didn't always show up in my house, on me, as making the big decision. Like, I felt equipped to go ahead and decide if my son was gonna have spinal fusion surgery. The way that the anticipated regret showed up was, I could barely decide what to make for dinner, because I was so afraid of making wrong decisions in some part of it. And so that's the way it sort of played out in my life. But for many people, it can make it very hard, especially couples, if they're sort of struggling in that space together to make a decision. And so I wanted to make you aware of that term, the reality of it, so that you can think about your own decision-making processes as you're caring for your children. And here's the real, that coping with regret means acknowledging early and often that every situation is imperfect, and you are going to make some imperfect decisions. Nobody gets it right every single time. So what you need to do is have compassion for yourself, trust that you are making the best decision you can make, given the information that you have in this very moment, because that's all you can do. You can't make a decision based on information you might have tomorrow if you need to make the decision today. You made the best decision you could with the information that you had in the moment. I'm gonna now play, I hope, play you a video from our websites. And not all of it will be applicable to your situation, but you'll get a sense of what we have.
Worry that they're going to have regrets. Sometimes parents already have some regrets, not doing something sooner, not finding a different doctor, not going to a different place. And sometimes people are worried that they're going to make a decision and then they're going to regret it. I think acknowledging that there are sometimes both the feeling of regret, the worry that they're going to regrets, and occasionally there are regrets. And it kind of comes with all the different feelings that occur.
When I got first diagnosis, right off the bat, I said to myself, that I wanted to make sure that throughout this entire process, that every decision that I made was something that I was going to be able to live with later on. I didn't want to have any regrets, and I can say, without a doubt, up until right now, that I don't have any regrets. Not one decision that I made for her, or one decision that I haven't made for her, do I regret. Not at all.
I think what's important is to help people understand that they've really done the best that they could at the time in a given situation, and that they've been thoughtful about their decision making, whatever it is, and acknowledge even when there were several different roads and they didn't know which one to go, and they examined all the different possibilities and they finally made a decision and made a choice. That later, when you look back and you know that you've been thoughtful about that, you knew there was a possibility of regret on the information you had and the supports that you had and the decisions in the moment. You thought about it, took the time, were really careful, and made the best decision you could. I think helps people later know that they had taken the time and gone through the process.
All right, I'm gonna stop the video there just because I'm looking at my watch and I wanna make sure we can get through everything else. That gives you just a little sense of what you might get on CPN. That's a mixed interview, so it included both a psychologist and parents. Most of them are not like that. You can go on and just listen to a clinician or go on and just listen to a parent. You know, we try to bring the wisdom of other parents to parents themselves because you guys are all here for that reason, to get each other's wisdom, right? So let's talk about, Nancy in that video talked about being thoughtful in your decision-making process. So what does that mean to be thoughtful? As I said earlier, at CPN, we're very big on being intentional about things. So one of those is reflecting on what kind of decision maker you are. And this is something that I don't think I ever really thought about until I started digging into the research around decision making. But there are several types of, I learned it's very big in business, but I'm not a business person, school teacher. But there are three main kind of decision makers. The planner explores all the options before making a decision, and they'll often take as long as need be to feel like they've explored all their options. The seeker rarely makes decisions without consulting others, but they are the one that thinks the most about the future. The intuitive person is the one that always drove me nuts, really, to be honest with you, but they're the person that seems to always know how to make the right decision without worrying. And there are people like that, God bless them, but I am not that person. I am actually a seeker. One way to think about your style is to look at how you've made decisions in the past, not just for your child, but in general, other decisions. What kind of car you bought, what kind of food you wanted to have for takeout. Think about how you made your decision. Did you need to pull everybody in the family for that takeout before you could decide which one you wanted, or did you know right away? Think about, did you have to look at every menu, by the way? Are you a planner and you need to look at every menu before you pick which takeout you're gonna have? Think about what type of decision maker you are. And then when you think about decisions that you've made in the past, when you're thinking about those decisions, I'm going to ask you and challenge you to identify the emotions that were attached to those decisions, because we'll talk in a little bit why, in the future, why that's important to understand your emotions. I wanted to give you, can't get it to advance now. Oh. Anyway, so I wanted to give you an example from my life, just so you can sort of have an example of how this can be important as you're trying to make decisions. My husband is a planner. In fact, we lived our entire first year of marriage without any kitchen chairs because he needed to sit on every chair before he could buy any kitchen chairs. Okay? And that's not a big decision when it comes to the kind that we're making, but I understood his process so that when we got around to deciding when my son was 14 if we were going to fuse his spine, which could have been for him a deadly operation at the time because he was so neurologically compromised. I knew that my husband was going to need to thoroughly research all the options. I knew he was going to have to go to 3 spine surgeons in order to find out in order to make the decision for himself. Alternatively, my husband, remember I'm a seeker, understood that I needed to talk to a bazillion parents who had been through it. And I really valued what they had to say. I needed to find confidence in my decision by listening to what they had to say. So how did this help in our decision making? Well, knowing each other's styles helped us support one another and for the decision to be shared, feel like we were sharing in it. And remember, I said to you, research shows that decisions that are shared are decisions we have better confidence in. So I learned to be patient and somewhat appreciative while he asked his list of questions to all these clinicians or did his online research. And he learned to weigh the lived experience a little more than he might normally do because he was a list maker planner. And he challenged me to say, listen to your own voice. You don't always have to listen to the crowd. What is your internal voice telling you? And together, that process of thinking it through and being very intentional about knowing what kind of decision makers we were helped us to develop our goals of care for our child. And we shared in those goals, and then because we shared in those goals, each decision became lighter and a little easier to make. So knowing this process will help you define your goals of care for your child as they progress through their life. Here's the other thing that goes into shared decision making. What is your complementary decision deliverer style, okay? As human beings, we tend to make sense of information based on how it is presented to us. This is the truth. You have a really good teacher, she presents it one way, that's how you're going to learn it. But generally, different types of decision makers have preferences for how they like information delivered. And these are the 3 basic types. The curator is the doctor that just makes one recommendation and that's it. Like when we went to the spinal surgeon, you're going to fuse his spine no matter what. That was it. He's just a curator. He tells you what to do. The teacher in the medical world is the one that kind of gives you all that data, explains all the possible options for you, and then generally lets you make a choice. Doesn't offer what the curator does, which is an opinion about what to do. The guide, on the other hand, usually explores your preferences and digs into things like goals of care. Are you worried about your well children while you're doing this with your medically complex child? Are you considering that you might have to travel to have this done? They sort of go through, they're sort of like the tour guide, and they explore all of that and help you sort through it and consider it as you're making a decision. Many of those people that are guides are palliative care doctors or palliative-minded doctors because that's what they do. They listen. And they listen deep and hard so that they can help you make your best decision. As I said, guess which one my husband wanted? Who would guess? He's the planner. Oh, he for sure wanted the teacher, right? Lay it all out for me. I tended to want the guide, someone who was listening to my feelings and would sit next to me and imagine every choice. Let's play through the scenarios. The guide often will say to you, let's play it out. If you make this choice, this will probably be what happens. And if you make this choice, this will probably be what happens, and helps you sort of envision what it is. Neither of us wanted the curator, but that's what we got when we were trying to decide to fuse my son's spine. It was prior to getting palliative care. And it was during that decision-making process that we actually brought someone in who could look at my whole child and see all of him and say, okay, this dystonia that he's having is not going to stop pulling his spine to the left just because he has a rod in it. The neurological message is going from one place to the other. The rod is correcting his spine, but it's not solving the problem. And so we needed all those doctors to be together. So we needed a curator. So why is it important to know what your style is and who the deliverer is? Well, one reason it's important is because you can have more confidence asking a clinician to adapt to your style. Maybe that's the only spinal surgeon you're going to get in your town. You might need to ask him to give you all the choices or walk you through or listen better to your goals of care. It might also give you the courage to say, hey, you're not the doctor I need right now. I'm going to divorce you and go look for a different one. But knowing your style can help you have confidence in that. It's going to help you seek extra resources that you might need to make decisions. In my case, it was a palliative care provider. It could be a social worker. It could be a really good friend. So that's another reason why it's important to be aware of what kind of decision maker you are. And again, I go back to this whole concept of sharing, and that when you share a decision, you feel more confident in them. So of course you want the person sitting across from you helping you make a decision to be sharing with you in that process. So I know it puts another responsibility on you when you have to look at the clinician and the way they deliver it, but I think bringing intentional and aware of it will help it feel less onerous. So here's a quote that my palliative care doctor said to me. It is probably the thing that changed my life the most when I was caring for my son, Ben. And this is why I asked you when you thought about a past decision to assign your feelings to them. Because we actually make decisions in two places. We make them in our heads and we make them in our hearts. And here's the thing, when your child is medically complex, which one do you think you lean on the most? And you forget to listen in here. But remember that regret thing that gets only in here? We have to learn to listen to both. And unfortunately, medical doctors also just want to appeal to your head. So you're not going to necessarily get that support, and you're going to need to learn to listen to your heart and value it as much. So I'm also going to challenge you when you leave here to think about a decision you made for your child, maybe one that you made outside of your child's care. Think about the feelings that were attached to it. And again, think about, was I making that decision with my head or with my heart? And sometimes one needs to be the leader over the other, right? We're making complex decisions. You've got to rely on the logic. But sometimes actually the heart needs to be the leader. And it's hard to know that. So how can you know these things? I know I'm running out of time. I just want to talk to you about something that's called anticipatory guidance, and it plays into decision making, and I'm going to run out of time. But anticipatory guidance is a very familiar practice. How many of you got the What to Expect When I'm Expecting book? Okay, that's anticipatory guidance. It tells you what might be coming in the future. And it's a common practice in the medical world, but it's not so common for families like ours. Why isn't it common? A lot of times pediatricians don't know. They're just not familiar with your child's particular disorder. The specialist wants to stay in their lane. They only want to guide you on that one topic, not your whole kid. Oftentimes providing anticipatory guidance for medically complex families includes uncomfortable conversations about probably not so great health outcomes. And doctors don't want to do that, and most of them, not all of them, there are good ones, especially the palliative care ones. And so anticipatory guidance is really an important part of being able to be a good decision maker. Think about it for a minute. You're all here at this conference looking for guidance from one another because you need to gain confidence in the decisions you're making, and being with one another, hearing each other's stories, listening to the decisions that other people have made is going to help you get there. That's all anticipatory guidance is. But we need the medical world to do it. So that brings me back to Courageous Parents Network. We have a lot of tools and resources that you can rely on for some anticipatory guidance. These are the ones we have around decision making because that's our topic today. And goals of care all fall into decision making. You can listen to videos from other parents making complicated decisions. You can try them on as, I like to say, you can watch the video and try on that hat. Do you like that parent? Is it the kind of decision-making process that you want to go through? Sure, then watch that video. If you don't, turn it off, find a different parent, because we're disease and decision agnostic. The right decision is the one that's best for your family. So try on the hats until you figure that out. But we went on to develop a second tool, and I don't know why this slide didn't work out. 4 years ago, we listened to clinicians, and we heard from clinicians and families that for a population dealing with children with severe neurological impairment, this anticipatory guidance was sorely lacking. Parents wanted more information. They wanted to understand how the brain was connecting to all the body systems. Clinicians were avoiding those conversations, like I told you in the example of my spinal surgeon, didn't want to look at what was going on neurologically with my son, just wanted to fix his spine. And so there's this something called prognostic awareness. It's a medical term, but it's sort of having an awareness of what's going on. And so we developed a tool called NeuroJourney specific to that, and I'm just going to play you the video that explains the tool. I was hoping to jump online and give you a little tour about, because I think there's a lot of information that will help provide this guidance that you might need to your families, but I think you'll get a gist of it just by this, and then we can go to Q&A.
Welcome to NeuroJourney. This educational resource and reference tool is designed for families and clinicians navigating the needs of a child who has a severe neurological impairment, sometimes called SNI. SNI is a phrase used in the medical community to describe a group of conditions or disorders that affect the brain and central nervous system. Signals from the brain control all of the systems in the body. They tell our lungs to breathe, our bowels to move, and our hearts to beat. Signals from the brain to the spinal cord drive our movement, so when the brain is impaired, all bodily systems are affected. There can be physical discomfort, problems with movement and thinking skills, and other medical complications as the condition progresses. Categories of SNI include metabolic neurodegenerative disorders, genetic conditions and syndromes, developmental epileptic encephalopathy and seizure disorders, and brain malformations, infections, and injuries. Every child is different, and the issues that may arise during an SNI journey may be different. Challenges might appear over an expected time frame, or one that's unpredictable. For example, some children with SNI are never able to walk, while others walk and then lose that ability over time. Some can feed themselves for a period, and some will always require support. Most experience pain, and some become frustrated and irritable. Some are verbal, and others communicate in unique nonverbal ways. This tool is designed to help you understand what may be happening to your child and to anticipate things that may arise now and in the future. It presents the medical topics you are likely to encounter, and you'll also find perspectives on the emotional and social topics that are part of providing loving care for your child. NeuroJourney uses 4 phases of full life to help you understand the challenges you might face, anticipate the conversations you may have, and prepare for the decisions you may need to make as you determine your goals of care for your child and navigate the illness journey. The phases are adapting to diagnosis, as your family adjusts in the early months following diagnosis or the emergence of issues. Building strengths to maximize your child's core skills and your family's resiliency for the journey ahead. Adjusting to changes, which involves making decisions and adapting to your child's evolving baseline throughout their journey. Navigating decline, as your child outgrows their brain's ability to manage their bodily systems. Your family may need to adjust their goals in preparation for the end of the journey. The content marked with a heart offers thoughts and perspective from parents and clinicians based on the concept of palliative care, which focuses on the quality of life and includes relief from symptoms and physical and emotional stress. You can see the map all at once, or follow the phases as they occur in your child and family. Some prefer to plan, and the others like to take things as they come. Some topics, especially the medical ones, are more complex and have layers of detail. You can take all of the time you need, exploring each topic as deeply as you like. There is no right or wrong in caring for your child, only what works for your family. The important thing to remember is every child living with an SNI has the potential for a meaningful life with a true arc. NeuroJourney.org is an initiative.
We don't need to watch the credits.
Organization.
So hopefully that just turned it off. You're not going to see, obviously the range of SNIs is very broad, so some of the things that you're going to encounter in NeuroJourney may not be things that honestly your community is going to experience. What you might benefit from is every chapter addresses who you might need on your team, and you might not know you need that particular provider on your team, and it can allow you to sort of look ahead and say, maybe I want to get that in play now because I might need it later. For example, and this is a very specific one, to a mom who didn't realize that as her daughter reached menstruation, she might want to have an endocrinologist because ultimately it's brain related and it's in the endocrine system. She thought she could just take her to her gynecologist. And so she didn't know that, and it was on the team. So you might find bits and pieces, and then the little part with the heart is the part that validates how you're experiencing. And so if you're feeling particularly isolated, you might find just reading the heart sections are the places where you want to go. You don't want to dig into the medical content. But you can poke around, and then Courageous Parents Network sort of has more broad and just does the psychosocial parts of it. But anyway, I'm happy to answer any kind of question that you might have in the little bit of time we have left.